Hey friends, Ash here with Gents, and today I'm going to be going over with you guys my choices of the 5 most influential niche fragrances that were released between 2010 and 2019. I did a designer version of this list not that long ago. That was my top 10 most influential designers. This one is niche, and as I said, it's just 5, not 10. The reason for that is because in my viewpoint, niche fragrances, unless it's an extremely popular release, are not quite as copycatted as designer releases. Niche releases oftentimes are a little more unique. So that's why this is just 5. If I made it 10, I would start including fragrances that maybe weren't necessarily influential, but were just successful. And since I'm trying to keep this list as influential fragrances, fragrances that have inspired others down the line, we're just gonna keep it to 5. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this. And of course, guys, it goes without saying, this is my list. These are fragrances that I find to have been influential. You may have a different list, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. If you think I've left something out that's a glaring omission, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. Again, we're looking at niche and indie fragrances released between 2010 and 2019. First off, I want to go over with you guys a fragrance that's kind of an honorable mention. The reason for that is because some of you out there will consider this niche. Some of you out there won't consider this niche. I'll explain why after I show the fragrance. It's this one, Tom Ford Neroli Portofino. Now this is obviously a fragrance released in Tom Ford's private blend line. And lots of you out there will consider this a designer fragrance for the reason I just said. Tom Ford is a designer. He's a clothing brand and has lots of other random accessories sold underneath the Tom Ford name. For me personally, I view the private blend more as niche fragrances. And I know some of you are going to disagree with that, but to me, these are fragrances made for a particular niche of customer. They're made for a much smaller customer base. Again, some of you out there will disagree with that, but for me, I usually view the private blend line of fragrances as more niche, even though a lot of you will technically call them designer. That's a lot of talk about niche and designer in this list, and I'll just leave it right there. But Tom Ford Neroli Portofino was an extremely influential fragrance and continues to be so. There's neroli, citrus, and orange blossom in here. Mainly, it's going to be a white floral and citrus-based fragrance, extremely good for spring and summertime wear. It's a very clean, refreshing sort of scent. It does share similarities to 4711, which is extremely inexpensive and is a fragrance that's been around for a long time, though this one is decidedly higher quality and does have more lasting power than 4711 does. And not to get into a conversation about 4711, but just because I know somebody's going to say it, I understand 4711 is not supposed to have a lot of lasting power and it's supposed to just be kind of a pick-me-up. I get that. All that being said, Neroli Portofino is an extremely successful and popular release in the private blend line that has spawned countless fragrances after it in the Tom Ford private blend line. On top of that, you'll find similar designer fragrances out there, like Ferrari Bright Neroli, for example. Not the exact same as this, but obviously inspired by this one. And this fragrance has really driven home the fact that niche companies can make fragrances like this one, looking at things like Pacific Rock Moss, for example, and have success, making fragrances that are essentially just clean, high quality, refreshing type scents for warm weather. A lot of times when people think about niche, they automatically go to your denser, more powerful, richer fragrances, but Neroli Portofino has shown it doesn't always have to be that way. Now let's finally crack into the 5 most influential, in my opinion. The first one that I'm going to talk about is SANTAL 33 by LABO, and I don't own a bottle of this one, just samples. And I should mention that this is not necessarily in any order, though the last 2 that I talk about are the ones I find to be the most influential. So these next 3, not necessarily in this order, 5, 4, 3. SANTAL 33 was released by LABO in 2011. 2011, and it quickly became basically the hipster fragrance of New York City. If you don't believe me, you can Google that. Santal 33 is a fragrance that some people just automatically associate with NYC at this point. It has sandalwood, papyrus, leather, and cedar as some of the notes in the fragrance. It has been copied numerous times, both by niche brands and houses like Zara that basically just copy fragrances at will, and even has some designer fragrances that smell similar to it as well, like Vince Camuto Vertu. It's a fragrance that really helped kick off LABO as a serious niche company, though a lot of people that are hardcore into fragrances will say that Santal 33 is boring or overly synthetic. The fact of the matter still remains, though, that it's an extremely popular fragrance that has inspired many other fragrances that have come out since. And as I said, it really helped kick off LABO as kind of a hipster niche brand that people have fallen in love with in major cities all across the planet. And I don't say hipster brand in a mean way there, it's just kind of how it's been described. Next up, let's talk about this one from MANCERA, Red Tobacco. This one was released not that long ago in 2017. Obviously, tobacco, one of the main notes in the fragrance, along with vanilla, cinnamon, and oud as some of the other notes in the fragrance. You might look at Red Tobacco and think to yourself, well, that's not really all that influential, but to me, it's starting to kind of poke its head out as being one of the more influential releases. There have been a couple of niche fragrances that I've smelled just over the past 2-3 months, and I'm talking about new releases that smell very similar to Red Tobacco. Red Tobacco is the type of fragrance that if you smell it, if you wear it a couple times, you're gonna be able to pick out anything that smells similar to this right away. It had a very unique scent profile when it came out. It opens up a little bit of a mess. There's a whole lot going on, but as it dries down, you get this nice tobacco that's sweetened up with vanilla, cinnamon, and then you get that touch of oud that kind of changes things up a little bit from your more typical sweet pipe tobacco scents. So you've got a little bit of darkness in here, a little bit of funk to go along with that sweetness. This fragrance showed that you can take tobacco fragrances, still make them easily worn, and have them get a little bit of a dirty twist in there as well, and people will accept it. Performance on that is great as well, which never hurts. And as I said, I've noticed a number of fragrances coming out smelling like Red Tobaccos, very seriously close. And it leads me to believe that here over the next few years, we're gonna have more fragrances come out that are based around the DNA of this scent. It may not smell the exact same as Red Tobacco, but I think you're gonna see a lot more fragrances done in this style. Next up, a fragrance that really helped kick off another house. Now, this was not at all one of the early releases from this house, but when it was dropped, this house was taken to another level in terms of just mainstream appeal and acceptance. It's this one, LAYTON by Parfums de Marly. As I said, there were lots of fragrances released by Parfums de Marly before this one, and a number of those releases were well received, but this one really just made PDM take off. And now, for a lot of people in the community, Parfums de Marly is viewed almost on equal footing with things like Creed in terms of just wearability while still having exclusivity. It's got vanilla, apple, cardamom, and lavender as some of the notes. It's an extremely appealing, versatile fragrance that you could wear nearly year-round, though it may be a little bit too cloying for high heat in the middle of summer. Great casual fragrance, something that you could wear easily on a date as well. This one I would not necessarily say has been copied a lot up to this point, but as I said, it really launched Parfums de Marly, which in turn has had other brands taking a look at what Parfums de Marly is doing. I'm talking about your more mainstream niche houses and thinking to themselves, maybe I could get in on that. So with releases like LAYTON, it's likely that in the future, you're going to see more of these niche houses releasing things that are maybe not as unique as niche fragrances were in the past. More niche fragrances that try to go with higher quality so that you have that exclusivity, as I talked about before, but with a decided designer twist. Parfums de Marly is one of the king brands at doing that, releasing fragrances that are niche, but at the same time have designer sensibilities in terms of versatility, wearability, and complement factor. And LAYTON is one of the reasons for that. The next two are from huge houses, and you probably know what they are already. This one, the next one I want to talk about, is from Maison Francis Kurkdjian. It's Baccarat Rouge 540. This one came out in 2015. And at this point, if you've watched a lot of fragrance videos on YouTube, you've probably seen 5, 6, 7 different fragrances compared to Baccarat Rouge 540, both on the designer side and the niche side, both in women's releases and men's releases and unisex releases. It has amberwood, saffron, fir resin, and ambergris as some of the notes in the fragrance. It's sugary sweet, it's appealing. It's a fragrance that just really struck a chord with lots of people out there. It became essentially Maison Francis Kurkdjian's biggest release as soon as it came out. Everybody was like, oh my God, I've got to get BR 540. You still see that online, people talking about it on a near daily basis. And of course, other houses took notice, as I said, and released their version of BR 540. Now, each one of those typically has a little twist. Maybe they've made it more masculine, added some leather in there, made it a little more feminine possibly, made it even more sugary, but they all share the common denominator of being inspired by this one. So much so that red fragrances has become synonymous with meaning smells similar to Baccarat Rouge 540. And it doesn't help that so many of those houses on the niche side have released versions of this or inspired by fragrances of this with a red bottle or a red label. They're not really hiding what they're doing. So there we go, Baccarat Rouge 540, one of the most influential fragrances in my opinion. And the most influential fragrance is not a surprise whatsoever. If anybody said that this is not the most influential niche fragrance released between 2010 and 2019, I would say, I think you got it wrong. It's this one, Creed AVENTUS. This one was released in 2010, so just barely made the cutoff. It's got birch and pineapple, of course, along with apple, musk, and black currant as some of the other notes in the fragrance. This one has been copied more than probably any fragrance that has ever existed. There are countless clones of this from clone houses, and there are countless inspired by versions of this fragrance as well. For the longest time, the inspired by fragrances, we're not talking about just straight up clones, but inspired by fragrances, were done by niche houses. But then over the last year, we've had Mont Blanc Explorer come out, so now we have designer houses getting in on the AVENTUS action as well. The AVENTUS DNA is firmly entrenched in men's perfumery at this point. Everybody has smelled it, it seems like, and even for the younger guys out there or people that don't want to spend the money on AVENTUS, they still want something that smells similar, and that's why you have that booming clone market for Creed AVENTUS that I mentioned before. It seems like in every single men's fragrance collection, there's either this or something like Club de Nuit Intense Man, or Pineapple Vintage, or L'Aventure by Haramain, or Explorer by Mont Blanc, or one of the versions of this inspired by fragrances released by another niche brand. And so without a doubt, in my opinion, Creed AVENTUS, the most influential niche fragrance released between 2010 and 2019, at least as far as men's fragrances go. So there we go, guys. That's my list, my top 5 most influential niche fragrances between 2010 and 2019. As always, thanks so much for all your support, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.